Welcome to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. I'm Matt Manocherian, former NFL scout and now of Sports Info Solutions, joined by Aaron Schatz, the godfather of football analytics and the founder of Football Outsiders. As always, we've got Justin Stein doing work behind the scenes, and a big shout out to Mark Simon, who has played a big role in producing this episode. Our goal is to highlight some women who are doing impressive work in football analytics. The SIS Baseball podcast did a similar feature where they went around MLB and looked at some of the women doing work behind the scenes. And we thought we'd do the same thing with a couple of up-and-comers in the football industry. So on today's episode, first up, we have Sarah Bailey. She's the manager of analytics and data at the Los Angeles Rams. By way of Simon Fraser University up in Canada, she is an analyst for the Rams, and Aaron and I sat down with her to discuss her career, her path, and football in analytics in general. Sarah, welcome to the show. Before we get into it, can you introduce yourself to the audience, explain where you're from, who you are, and what you do?
So I'm Sarah Bailey. I am from Vernon, British Columbia, which is in Canada, and I'm the analyst for the LA Rams. And essentially, I get to work with football data on all sides of the football side of sport and apply math and team sports.
So where did you start with your interest in football and math, especially coming from north of the border? How'd you end up in American football?
So I was a track athlete, and so I wanted to go to the States on a track scholarship. So I ran D1 in college, and that's kind of what brought me down to the United States. And then I was in a bio major to start, and didn't really like it. Didn't really think. I thought maybe I'll be a vet, but I realized I just like animals. I don't want to actually work with them. So I just started talking to my math professor, and he was looking at different options and what I could do with it. And so I switched to math, and really started to get into sports, I guess, later. I realized kind of like my third year of university that I didn't really have any research experience. And I was like, this isn't going to help me for job exposure. So I spoke to a professor, and she was just like, well, what do you like? Like, how can we work together on this? And I was like, well, I like sports. And she was like, all right, here we go. So it kind of worked out that she's like supported and asked me the question.
That sounds awesome. So how did you get from that point to getting your job now?
After college, I got an internship with the San Diego Chargers at the time. And I was actually in their digital media department, which was like looking at website performance and app performance, social media, things like that working with the ad team. And it was kind of there that I was like, you know what, I liked the environment of sports. I like the competitive edge, but I don't necessarily like the media side. It was a great opportunity. I loved the people I worked with, but I was kind of like, gosh, you can do this in other aspects, like looking at different sports that were more progressive, like baseball and basketball. So I decided that I was not smart enough and I needed to go back to school. So I looked into master's programs that had professors that were focusing on sports research. So really just started reading analytical papers and journals and kind of looking at who was on it and what school did they teach at. And ultimately ended up back in Canada at Simon Fraser under my advisor, Tim Swartz, and just went there and started my master's in stats. And then I was working on baseball research and did a bunch of things during my master's. I did the NBA hackathon, this hockey graphs data sprint that was hosted by the Canucks at the time, and just really tried to apply everything I did into sports. And then I did my master's in a year and a half. I finished early. I just wanted to accelerate it because I felt like I wanted to get out of school and get into the industry. And I applied in like October of the final semester, and kind of went back and forth, flew down, had an interview, didn't hear back for like 6 weeks. And I was like, I didn't get it. Like, they just didn't let me know. But turns out they were trying to hire more than one person at once. So they did a second round of interviews and end up letting me know. At the time, I actually had like another offer from a baseball team, and was like football, baseball, and knew I wanted to do football. So, and I ended up here. I finished my master's, I think, on like a Tuesday and drove down on Friday and started work.
So you were hired with someone else. How are the responsibilities? Like, what are your responsibilities, and how are they divvied up between different people in the department?
Initially, it was a trial period, like 6 months, and so the other person went in a different direction. They wanted to go through different teams, and I stayed on. So initially, I was hired as a sports performance side, so working with the athletic trainers and the strength and conditioning coach and the director of athletic training, and looking at their health data. Because of my sport background, they thought that would be a better fit for me. And then when the other person left, I transitioned into kind of all areas, the personnel and the coaching, and really get to kind of explore every single department.
And how many people are there in your department now?
So we're small. In terms of like modeling analyst, it's just me. But we have a data architect, and he does a lot of, the ad hoc analytics, where like organizing the data, summarizing the data. And then we have our system engineer who presents it and puts it on to our internal scouting system, and really helps with the visualizations when everything's all done.
Right. So it sounds like instead of organizing it by like somebody deals with the coaches, somebody deals with the personnel, it's more based on the function.
Yeah. And I mean, that's obviously ideal in terms of what you'd want in a department. And, we are hoping to expand, but with everything going on right now, it's kind of like everything's frozen. So I'm actually very fortunate and thankful that I came in being able to not have to go into a niche, because now I get exposure to every single department. So I can discuss, contracts, I can discuss coaching, and I can discuss the medical side. So it's been good exposure. It is nice after a bit to get some help.
So, okay. So let's kind of take a little bit of like a different approach and say like in your job, something's coming from the coaching staff. What's the process for going from the coaching staff either asking you a question or not even realizing that they are asking a question and you having to either bring it to their attention? Like, how does it all start, and what's sort of the process like of carrying through an answer to something that you would provide?
It really comes like either they're going to ask a question, or you're kind of exploring something like, hey, this could be really useful for such and such department. With coaching, it's mostly coming to ask questions. Pretty basic, depending on what the type of question is. If it's a quick analysis where you're just kind of gathering information, then you produce it and you submit it to them, either print out, leave it on their desk. It all depends on the coach. Some people prefer to receive it via email. Obviously, everyone's receiving email right now, but some people prefer to have it hand delivered in their hands. So it really depends. It can be a visualization through Excel, or just a chart in Excel, a Tableau. I don't ever hand code over. No one needs to see that. I just give the final product. It can even be a Word document that summarizes everything very simply and kind of informal. Really the easiest way that someone can digest it is the way that I'm going to show it, because I don't want to have to explain the background of the model, because they don't want to hear. Like, it is what it is if there is a model involved. So typically they ask questions. Like I said, it depends on the department. Sometimes, like, because I started in the sports science department, I'm more familiar with some of the things that they want. So if I see some like a cool research article or something, then I'll send it their way. I'll send some like preliminary results and say, hey, what do you think? Should we keep going down this pathway?
So you work with how often would you say you are coming up with ideas for what to study versus how often, whether it's the salary cap folks or the coaches or someone's coming to you with an idea that they want you to study?
I guess we have a lot of conversations. Like, we all talk a lot. There's a very good open dialogue. So sometimes someone will mention something that maybe they don't know we can do or that we can make better. And so I kind of like, I'm always having my ears open in terms of those conversations, whether it's just a normal scouting meeting where the scouts are talking and we're just in the background listening, and we'll come up with those kind of ideas. I would say they might start the idea, but the actual research process is all me, in terms of like how I go about tackling the issue, what data I want to use, how I want to handle missing data, how I want to handle the model. Those kind of things is all on me, just because of the specific skill set. The idea of yourself, it's probably like Probably a good 50-50 split. It really depends on the department. Coaching is like mostly 100% them. There's a lot of things I'd want to do, but you have to think about your market and who your buyer is and how useful it is. So usually, you want to stick with things that they want and they know they want.
And I'll hear a lot of people say, you can't do analytics with football. And, it's not like baseball where you can divide things up like that. I'm sure we all hear different versions of that all the time. My perspective on that is really that we've been dealing with insufficient data for years and years and years. And now we live in an age where there's some more data that's being out there and being used. But I'm wondering, from your perspective, what sorts of challenges do you face given the football data that you are using and that you have available to you at this point? What sorts of challenges do you face in terms of putting that to use and answering the questions that are posed to you?
I think there's a point in what you say, and that there's, even the tracking data that everyone's gung-ho about, there's only 3 years of it. The first year is kind of a throwout year anyways, so because of the quality and just the changes that have been made in their calculations. And every year even there's, really puts out different changes that have occurred that are going to affect. So you almost have to start again. And so there is that issue in terms of the data length. There's different changes too. Like if you decide to change something in your scouting system, so now you changed your grade scales for players, and you've only done it for the last year. So how do you evaluate your new grade scale when you only have it for a year? Well, you kind of have to look at other things or try and convert your old scale into the new scale, which is an imperfect process, of course. The other thing is just, really staying focused on like I kind of mentioned, like there's a lot of things that I think are really cool and valuable, but it's not ultimately. It's interesting from a research side, and it would be a cool published paper. But in terms of helping the team and helping win games and helping become better, it might not be. So it's keeping a clear focus and like really evaluating your projects. Like, hey, like who am I doing this for, and who's it going to help? Because like you can't be selfish and just be like, well, I think it's cool. You want to help the team.
How has doing this for a living changed the way you watch football? Obviously, those of us who've been doing this for a long time watch football a lot differently, other than the fact that you're now a fan of the Los Angeles Rams. You may not have been before. How has it changed, watching football? What's going through your mind when you're watching the game? Yeah,
it's interesting. Like, when you're a regular fan, you're kind of just watching the ebbs and flows of the game, like watching the ball really. But from this side, my biggest issue is evaluating players, right? Like giving contributions. So I like to take my eye off the ball and kind of look at what does the defense do? What formation are they in? How far back is the safety? Is it how is that affecting the play? Looking at more of the details that you might not otherwise see. Looking at different snap counts, just the stats, the box score, pay more attention. Sometimes, you just got to shut your brain off and just enjoy the game. But it's kind of interesting to look at the nuances and, instead of seeing what the main play is and what everyone might see, you're trying to say, well, what happened that left the receiver wide open, and where was the faulty coverage, and just different situations that as an average fan, maybe, yeah, of course, there's always people that are going to look at that. But just from my perspective, I just kind of watched the game. I didn't really pay attention to the different nuances.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to, from my time with the Saints, especially being around all the great domain-specific knowledge, coaches, the way that they're thinking about things. The more you can educate yourself on that, the more you can really attack questions the right way. I don't care what data you have. You need to be kind of asking the right questions and attacking them. One thing that I definitely can't relate to, though, is being a woman in football. So what are the biggest challenges that you've faced?
I've been very fortunate with my current team that, they're really supportive of women in sports and never made me feel uncomfortable because I'm a woman, or explicitly even stated that you're a woman. The biggest thing I've had to deal with is people apologizing to me for cursing in the draft room, and I just curse back at them and say it's fine. But you have had different experiences with different people, even in the world, where you get questions that are like, well, how are you going to know football? You've never played. Did your dad play football? Did you grow up in a coaching environment? Well, no, I can't change my past, but it's on me to learn. So it's interesting for sure. And It's not necessarily always easy, and you do always feel like you're trying to prove something because you haven't played football. You can't. Like, would I love to have played football? Heck yes, I would love to tackle people and and play, but I can't change that. So from my experience with the Rams, it's been great, and I know a lot of other people have. We do have women in football on our team and on our side, and with a lot of recent events in the media and stuff, there's been a reach out more to the women, and just reinforcing that fact that, hey, like, we're here for you, and if there's ever something that happens or goes wrong, like, you need to bring it up. So I can say that I'm lucky in my experience. I can say that there have been unpleasant experiences too, but not to the extent that that other people have, which I'm not sure. Like, you rub certain things off, and that's okay, but you have to be tough in this sport, whether you're a female or a male. I don't care if you're the baddest guy in your college, or the most sensitive female, like, in terms of, and that's a general stereotype. I don't even like using that, but wherever you fall on the spectrum of toughness, like, you have to be tough in football. It doesn't matter your gender, it doesn't matter your race, it doesn't matter whatever you identify with, you have to be tough. And everyone's tough, and it's competitive, and that's one of the reasons why I like it, is because, it's not, you're going to be told the truth. You're not going to be beaten around the bush. Like, people are going to tell you whether they're happy with your work or not, and it's an opportunity to improve.
Something tells me that the people of Canada that grew up around you are lucky that you weren't running around the field and tackling them, because I definitely hear the toughness in your voice just as you talk about it.
Yeah, like I said, I was an athlete, so I'm competitive.
So what recommendations would you have for aspiring analysts, people who are still students, male or female? What is your advice for getting into this? We get that question a lot, so we're going to pose it to you.
Yeah, my biggest thing, and it might be an unpopular opinion, but don't pigeonhole yourself into a sport. I know a lot of people want to go into football. I wanted to go into football, but I did baseball, basketball, and hockey research in college. Like, I applied for every single job I found that was sports related, whether it was for a team, whether it was for a league, whether it was for a company. I think the biggest thing is, like, opportunities in football and in any sport, they're rare. They're right now, it's not as popular as you might think, but if you can do work in other sports or other areas of it, you can apply it to football. So you're not wasting your time by looking at other things, and you can still do football research too. But don't be so gung-ho on just focusing and narrowing your pathway to one sport and one even dimension of sport. Like, if you're just going to look at coaching, then you're one-dimensional. So once you get your foot in the door, I find you have opportunities come to you. So for me, it's always been like, just be versatile. You can learn, like, especially in analytics and stats, like, you can apply models to different areas and aspects, and your ability to come up with new ideas that may not typically be attached to football or attached to the coaching or attached to medical, whatever it is so valuable that's going to be more than you have specific sport research.
That makes a ton of sense. I work with baseball people that have been working with coordinate data for years and have so much insight, both technically, but also in the way that they attack problems, that you'd be surprised how applicable they are. So I couldn't agree with you more in that respect. Sarah, you've been so awesome. Thank you for your time today. If there's just one question we'd like to leave you with, and that is, what have you seen in terms of the number of women working in football analytics, and what can be done so that this number increases? We want to be part of the change.
We've definitely seen, I think when I started, there were 2 of us or 3 of us, and now, there's like 7 or 8, and that still seems like a small number, but given the size of each analytics department, that's a pretty big growth in 3 years. I think the biggest thing is just like, gosh, just do it. Like, don't just apply, look, show your work. Don't be shy about what you're doing. There's smart women out there. I was listening to some research done by college students that they were doing in medical and sports, and it was so good and so smart. And just be confident in what you're doing. And it's from the sport perspective, don't look at someone because of their gender or what it's as that's not valuable. It's what their research is. And I think really just putting yourself out there and applying for jobs and making your voice heard is one of the key ways to get in, because people are listening and it's becoming a big topic. And now is the time to like say, hey, like, look what I did.
Sarah, thank you so much for enlightening us today. It's been awesome having you on, and good luck this year.
Thank you so much.
That was Sarah Bailey of the Los Angeles Rams. If you're interested in hearing more from women in sports analytics, check out the SIS Baseball podcast. Emily Badis is a salary cap and contracts analyst with the Atlanta Falcons. Aaron and I sat down with her just a few minutes ago. Emily Badis, thank you for joining us. We're excited to get to know you a little better. So right off the bat, can you introduce yourself to our audience, explain where you're from, who you are, what you do?
Yep. So I'm Emily. I'm originally from a small town outside of Philadelphia called Kennett Square. It's actually the mushroom capital of the world. It's like the fun fact. I'm currently the salary cap and contracts analyst for the Atlanta Falcons.
That's interesting. So what's the best mushroom? Like, you must know, like, what is the number one variety of mushroom?
I actually don't really like mushrooms.
Oh, by God, perish the thought.
I like risotto, so if mushrooms are in risotto, that's fine. But otherwise, I'm not a big mushroom eater.
Aaron, do you have a number one mushroom?
Chanterelles, how's that?
Sounds great to me.
My brother goes hunting for mushrooms in the woods of Western Massachusetts, so I always thought Western Massachusetts was the mushroom capital of the world, but apparently I am mistaken.
We just produce the most amount of mushrooms in the world. So a lot of places where you buy them, you'll actually see on the packaging that it says from Kennett Square, Pennsylvania. It's pretty cool.
So maybe it's a quantity over quality thing. The Western Mass is where you really want to get the good stuff. All right. So Emily, how did you get into analytics, capology, everything that you're doing now?
So I actually hadn't really thought about ever becoming a salary cap and contracts analyst until my initial internship. It was extended when our director of football operations wanted an intern himself after my first 6 months. So then I was subsequently made full-time. And to be completely honest, I wasn't sure I had the background and knowledge of the CBA to be successful in the role. It's just so much information. But cap and contracts has since become my passion, and I'm so happy I went out of my comfort zone to get into the position I'm in today.
Yeah. What kind of college experience did you have that got you ready to do this for a career?
So my bachelor's is in math and my master's is in applied statistics. So I have the analytical background, but aside from that, I don't really have a contract or negotiating side.
You don't have a law degree or anything like that?
No. I went into undergrad as a poli-sci major. I wanted to be a lawyer initially, but I changed that path pretty quickly. But law school is not out of the question in the future. That's definitely something I've been looking into.
Okay, so kind of from going undergrad where you got the technical skills, but you really weren't, like you said, a capologist at all. How did you come to work for the Falcons? Like, what was that pathway like?
So right after I finished grad school, I started interviewing for the internship with the Falcons. I'd actually applied for a full-time position with the Texans that spring and got into the interview process, but not super far. And they ended up hiring someone else. But then Carl Pierberg at the Falcons, when he started looking for an intern, he reached out to his buddy at Houston and my name was passed along. And that's how I got into that process. And then I started the internship mid-training camp that August, and then eventually was made full-time, and I just never left.
This is how many years ago? How long have you been working for the Falcons?
3 years. My 3-year anniversary was actually about a week and a half ago.
Oh, I'm sure LinkedIn was nice enough to remind you.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you weren't into the cap side of things as much, but you were into football. Like, you knew that you wanted to work in football.
Yes, absolutely. I wanted to be a football analyst and be somehow involved in the football side of things.
How did you get into football originally?
I just grew up watching football and loved it. And, being from outside Philadelphia, it's a very passionate area as far as football fans go. So growing up with my dad and my brother as very strong Eagles fans, football was a big staple in my house. So it kind of just, and I played sports growing up. So the competitive mindset was really big to me. So to be able to combine the two was huge.
So what does your current role look like? What kind of analytics do you do as a salary cap analyst?
My main responsibilities are to provide research for player contract negotiations and handling any other requests that come from our cap and contract side. But in addition to that, I also assist our other analysts in our department in providing reports and studies for our coaching and personnel departments.
And how do those interactions work when you're working with the other departments? Like, say you're doing something for the GM versus doing something for the linebackers coach. How do those interactions sort of play out within the Falcons?
So we basically just serve as a service department for the rest of football operations, and we handle any requests that they may have.
So it's often that they'll kind of like push the questions towards you, and then you guys kind of triage through it, whether it be a contract question or something different. And are there people that specialize more in other roles on your analysis team? Like, are you the contracts person?
Yep. So I handle any contract request that comes to us. And then we have two other analysts. John is the manager of football analytics, and he oversees more of the coaching side. And then me and my coworker, Danny, is more dedicated to the scouting side. So we have all of our own little parts that we're involved in the majority of the time, but we also cross over. And if someone needs help, we assist them as well.
Is there anything, talking about working with the salary cap, for people who don't work in the football business, who are just fans, is there anything you can compare that to? What's the hardest thing for people who are outside the business of football to understand about the salary cap and doing analytics on the salary cap?
I'm not sure what really to compare it to. I just know one of the hardest things is that there are so many moving parts to the salary cap and contracts and how they're structured. And I think that a lot of fans need to be a little bit more patient with their front offices. It's a lot more complicated than it appears on the outside. And I think that's one of the most difficult things for people to realize.
Well, it doesn't help when a new contract gets announced and they always announce, the contract is X years, X $1 million. And we know there's so many different ways that can be structured to come out to a total, that the total become it's all in the intricacies, right?
Exactly. That's why I tend to wait for the contract to come through instead of reading the media headlines reporting what it is.
How do you watch football differently than you used to because of your job? Do you have a different kind of lens to the game than you did growing up?
For sure. So I watch them a lot more seriously now since they have a direct impact on my day-to-day and my job. So wins and losses are a lot more important to me than previously when I was just a fan and would get upset about the potential of not making playoffs. And then for away games, I attend all of our home games, but for away games, I prefer watching them by myself because I just don't like the distractions and I need to focus on the game. And I used to watch every week with my friends or family. So that has definitely changed a lot for me. I yell at the TV in my room by myself.
We have that in common.
Yeah. As the person on this podcast who's never worked for a team, I'm the one who's never experienced having to put aside my sort of childhood rooting interests for my work rooting interests. But do you ever find yourself sort of conflicted when the Eagles and the Falcons are playing each other?
I actually don't. That's a question I get very often. My first season, it was a really easy switch for me. It was, if I don't get a ring, if the Eagles win, and coincidentally enough, they did win the Super Bowl my first year in the league. But I went to our playoff game that year and I had Falcons attire on, and I actually got punched in the shoulder by an Eagles fan. So that kind of ruined it for me. That kind of was really easy for my allegiance to switch over.
I was going to say, we were going to ask you what sort of challenges you faced as a woman working in football. I guess getting punched isn't one of them that I had considered.
Well, I think that's not super off key for Eagles fans. So
I was going to say, at least as a member of the Falcons front office, you were legally allowed to root against the Patriots in the Super Bowl the year after that they had beaten the Falcons. So your Super Bowl winning rooting interests were aligned.
Yeah, I sat quietly during the Super Bowl and just took the win as it was.
So what else intrigues you about football analytics? When you look at what's going on out there, are there certain things that are sort of happening, for example, in the public football analytics world that you feel like have a really big impact for how contracts may work in the future?
I think so far the most intriguing part for me is it's still generally so new compared to other professional sports. Baseball has had analytics become an integral part of the front office for so many years now. And so in football, there are still so many concepts and use cases that haven't been uncovered, and getting to explore those ideas and provide something to assist in the success of the team is really exciting to me.
Without giving away any trade secrets, is there anything, with COVID affecting the revenue and therefore the salary cap next year? What should the public understand about that? Is there kind of like a sort of brief overview that you could give of like how that's going to affect things at a very high level?
I think tough decisions are going to have to be made by every team. And it's going to be fans, I think, are going to have a lot of issues potentially. But it's a business and it's a pandemic. There's only so much that teams can do.
It's interesting that you say that, because sometimes I think expectation control can be an important thing. Like we've all seen the 76ers just fired their head coach this week, and the whole process played out, and then they abandoned the process and whatever else. But just thinking about the context of all of that sort of thing, it kind of makes me wonder in terms of if they could have done a better job explaining what they were doing in a way that they could have seen through a little bit better. Sometimes when you're making those hard decisions that the fans don't quite get, he's such a good player, why would we cut him? It can help if they sort of understand where you're coming from.
Yeah. Sometimes it's tough. I mean, especially in football, there's a salary cap and we have to follow what the league sets for us. It's not up to each team's discretion like it is in some other sports. And so difficult decisions have to be made sometimes.
So we mentioned this briefly, but just to get into it a little bit more, since it is sort of the focus of the episode, what has it been like for a woman working in football, working in a football front office? Do you feel you face certain challenges? Do you think things are going to open up a bit more in the future?
The biggest challenge so far that I've faced, people ask me what I do professionally, as they ask anyone. And when I say I work for the Atlanta Falcons, their first assumption is, oh, are you a cheerleader? And there's nothing wrong with being a cheerleader. It's great if that's the path that you want to take. And it's awesome. And they're part of the team. But there are other roles for females in a football organization. And that assumption can be a dangerous one sometimes. That's been a point of frustration for me and trying not to react the way I sometimes would like to.
To take the listener behind the Zoom call a little bit here, I think you just literally knocked Aaron off of his chair when you said that. And then, of course, you prove that you are very much an analyst and not a cheerleader by talking about being mindful of assumptions immediately in your response.
Yeah, it's not a fun one, but it has gotten humorous after a few times, because it's at this point I'm like, all right, you know what? Sure. Yep, that's what I am.
Yeah, I'm the head cheerleader, actually.
Yeah.
I was going to say, cheerleader is not a full-time job as far as
No, it's not. And I think that's another thing fans just don't really realize. But otherwise, I've been super lucky with the Atlanta Falcons. They're fantastic at integrating women into the organization and specifically within football operations.
Yeah, we laugh, but I'm sorry that you do have to deal with that assumption, because that's annoying and more than annoying in a lot of ways. On a more positive note, what have you seen in terms of the growth of women in football? You just said you were supported by the Falcons and you feel very supported. So do you see more growth coming? Where do you think the field is heading?
Yeah, so just in the past 3 years of working in the league and with the Falcons, I've seen firsthand the growth of women within our organization, and especially the number of women in our football operations department alone. It's increased, and we have 2 female scouting assistants now, and our previous scouting assistant just left to be a full-time area scout with the Giants. So there are women being hired in historically male-dominated roles, and I think that progress is taking place across the league, and I think it's only going to continue to improve.
And what kind of recommendations do you have for aspiring front office people, particularly if people want to get into the salary cap world? Like, what kind of recommendations do you have for how people get jobs, what the kind of training they need to do to get jobs? Like, what should be in your background?
My background is mostly in coding. So I think if you want to do analytics, that's like step number one, you need to know how to code, at least in one language. And then I think just my most important piece of advice is be willing to start from the bottom. Like so many people that get their start in football start as interns. I mean, I'm Exhibit A. I was an intern for over a year before I got a full-time position. And that obviously wasn't super easy and there were struggles behind it. But I think if you want to get into football, you need to be willing to do what you need to, and you have to take the stairs to get to where you want to be.
Exhibit B right here. I got in with an internship originally also. So you're right on there. Just out of curiosity, you mentioned coding languages as a key skill for analysts. What coding language do you spend the most time in, or would you recommend one of them over the others?
I primarily use SQL, but then I do some work in R as well, and definitely want to explore that a little bit more than I currently do. And I know one of our other analysts uses Python more than he would R. So you can use anything. I mean, I learned SAS in grad school. Haven't used it since, but it's another one, and they're similar enough that once you know one, it's easy to pick up another one.
I think that's pretty common. SAS more used in grad school, but we're exactly the same. Everybody needs to use SQL on our research team, but then once you pull the data, people usually prefer R. Some people prefer Python. So when we're hiring, we usually say SQL plus one or the other is probably the best way you could go. So it sounds like you're giving similar advice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Emily, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and just sharing your experience with us. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you both so much for having me. This is awesome.
Thank you for listening to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. We'd like to thank our guests, Sarah Bailey from the Los Angeles Rams and Emily Badis from the Atlanta Falcons. We appreciate all of the wisdom that you shared with us today. And on behalf of all of us, keep getting after it and keep doing what you do because we think it's awesome. We also recommend that all of the listeners check out the Women in Baseball Analytics episode of the SIS Baseball Podcast featuring Mark Simon, where Emily Curtis and Kiri Oler talked about their jobs in baseball.
So that particular example came from just a really short presentation that I did with our player development staff. So it was a bunch of our minor league coaches who have been taking some of their downtime before the season started to educate themselves some more on analytics. So they were having different R&D members come in and go over different concepts with them. And we were basically explaining like the value and limitations of two different metrics. So one was an older school metric that was based on averages. And as you know, when you average things together, you lose some nuance there. So that was the metric that I compared to the poop emoji, because when you mix a bunch of colors together, it comes out brown.
For my co-host, Aaron Schatz, our guests, Sarah Bailey and Emily Badis, and our producers, Justin Stein and Mark Simon, I'm Matt Manocherian, and thank you for joining us for the latest episode of the Off the Charts Football Podcast.